Welcome to Quest for Peace, a podcast that explores how we can journey towards inner tranquility in the midst of a chaotic world. In an era filled with uncertainty, conflicts, and global challenges, our quest for peace becomes more vital than ever. Together, let's discover how we can create more peace within ourselves, and by doing so, how we can contribute to a more peaceful world. Hello, friends. Welcome to Quest for Peace. I am Saju Vaswani, your host. Today's guest is a transpersonal psychologist, holistic nutritional chef, and a best-selling author, Dr. Meg Haworth. Dr. Meg helps women survivors of parental narcissistic abuse go from wounded icons, which is adult children of narcissists, to healed icons, which is independent, confident, original, and naturally you. She has a one-on-one therapy and coaching practice, online courses, and YouTube channel. Welcome, Dr. Meg, to my show. Welcome, Dr. Meg. Thank you very much for being in my podcast, on my show. I'm so excited to work with you today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Yeah.
Awesome. Today's topic is all about narcissism and how that affects us, or, if you have a parent who's a narcissist, or a relationship that has, there is narcissism. And so it's so important for these things if we want to get peace in this life. And that's what we want to do. Our quest is for peace. There's so many things that we need to take care of before we get there. So I would love for you, please, to tell everyone first, before we do anything, tell us anything about yourself, so everyone gets to know you better.
Yeah, so I have been in this work for like 25 years, and a big part of how I got into working with narcissistic abuse is I was raised by one of my parents, and have been in relationships with people that were narcissistic. And then what happened though is I was in my 20s, I was sick all the time. And I never really understood, or I started to understand in my late 20s, early 30s, that, abuse is really connected to the physical body, of course, and how the body gets worn away over time, and how, we can get sick. Especially, I think emotional abuse is one of the worst, because it really literally drains us to the point where we just don't have enough energy to run our biology, and so it can make us sick. And so I became so fascinated with that, because as I started to work with food and getting the foods out of my system, and the body products and all the things in my environment that were exacerbating the problem. But when I got to the real root core, it was the emotional root cause of the illness that really did the healing. I mean, it just exponentially healed me so quickly that I was like, I have to do this. I have to help other people with this. So,
Well, that's wonderful. So you have been through it yourself. It's not that you just learned it and you're teaching, so you know very clearly how everyone feels. And it's fascinating that when you healed your emotions, everything else got healed.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense now that I understand that everything really begins from the energy system inward to the physical body. And so your energy system is running on mostly emotional energy, your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs. And when you get to those core negative beliefs that got formed during those experiences of abuse and let them go, it releases so much energy and helps your system to be able to, again, run its biology and the way it's meant to be run. So it's a really powerful kind of work.
Yes. And what you also said about the mental abuse is much more than physical. And you would think, no, because physically, there are people get beaten up and all kind of stuff. And you're saying that mental abuse is worse? How's that?
I think emotional abuse can be worse because there are no visible scars. And so when you go to tell somebody about it, and I hear this from my clients all the time because they go to a traditional psychotherapist who minimizes them, who dismisses them, who tells them maybe, well, you just need to forgive, you just need to let it go. And they don't understand how insidious this can be. And they don't necessarily know how to work with these kinds of wounds. And so that makes it so much harder for the patient who is just reaching out for help because, again, you can't see the scars, but they're there, and they're so intense because there's this constant rumination that happens where you're always worried, does this person like me? Oh no, they don't like me. Or you're just constantly trying to, because you were programmed to give a lot of attention to this narcissistic parent or this narcissistic mate. You had to focus on them so you don't focus on yourself. You don't even know who you are in most cases. People always are like, I don't even know what my identity is because, I wasn't, it was never nurtured. It was never brought out. It was never allowed to really shine because it wasn't important to that narcissistic parent. That person was the only one who was important. So yeah, so when you can't see the wounds and people, it doesn't make sense to people, and so they do minimize them.
Mm. So, but emotional wounding doesn't always come from a narcissistic person,
No,
does it?
no, a person can be very critical and emotionally abusive, but not be a narcissist. And I think it's really important to make the distinction because a lot of people are labeling people as narcissists these days when they're actually not. And of course, it's not up to me to diagnose them or treat them. I don't work with narcissistic people, although I have had quite a few in my practice. But I think, it's important to understand that there is a big distinction between somebody who could be emotionally abusive and someone who's
So,
narcissistic.
so can you describe a narcissistic person?
Yeah. So a narcissistic person, it has a grandiose sense of self. And even the covert narcissist who is really on a negative end of the spectrum where they usually do poor me victim consciousness to try to get people into their world. The more obvious ones are the ones that are like super charming and grandiose and everybody loves them, but behind closed doors, they're just a monster. They're hypercritical. They can be very cruel. They can constantly be gaslighting people, which is different than lying. Of course, lying is a big part of being a narcissist. But one of the key indicators is low to no empathy. I would say no empathy, which means it's not the same thing as sympathy. Empathy really means that they cannot put themselves in your place, which means they will not put themselves in your place. So, like you as a parent, you might think, oh, if I say that to my son, it's going to impact him in this way. And I don't want to be like that to him. A narcissist has zero filter for that. So it would never occur to them that if I say this or do this, it's going to impact them in a way that would be destructive to them. There's just no connection to that whatsoever. And so that makes them potentially really dangerous and makes that abuse, I think, even more insidious and difficult to grapple with because I often refer to it as it cuts away at you one cut at a time. And it's very painful to go through.
Is it possible that children can have narcissistic parents but still completely love them and, you know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I never went no contact. A lot of people do that. Still really love my parent who's a narcissist, and I still care. I mean, I have empathy and I'm actually very grateful that I have that ability to still feel love. But it was also a significant amount of work I did on myself and continue to do to be able to find that love in my heart. A lot of people who are raised by narcissists will cut that off too because it's just too painful to feel that experience. And they're so angry and so enraged and feel so guilty and so ashamed, which are all the emotions that they just get pummeled with by the narcissistic parent.
You, of course, because you are in this work, understood that your parent was narcissistic. how do people recognize? I mean, you told me all the things, but with all the people that you work with, how did they recognize that their parents or their spouse or whatever was a narcissist?
Yeah, I hear this so often that it took them years and years and decades. A lot of people come to me in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s and say, I finally see it now. Because it's so difficult to see your parent in this light. And it was normal. The way that they treated you was normal in terms of how they programmed you and how they spoke to you and all of that. And I think one of the ways that we can really figure this out too is the wounds that it has in us. Because ultimately, we need to, at some point, take our attention off of that narcissistic parent and put it all on us and give ourselves the love and the respect and the care and the kindness and the healing that we never got from that narcissistic parent. So that's incredibly important to really learn. And that's, a lot of us are codependents. We're people pleasers. We want to make everyone else happy. We don't have good boundaries and all of that because we never learned about them. So those are some of the ways to start telling. It's like, well, what about you? What's going on with you? How's your self-esteem? That's a big one. How do you feel about you? Do you put yourself down regularly? Are you basically repeating the same behaviors that the narcissistic parent installed in you? They're the same beliefs, telling yourself you're an idiot because they told you that, or they showed you that. A lot of times it's what they show you and not necessarily exactly what they say, but because a lot of times what they say is completely opposite of what they show you. So it's a very confusing way to be parented.
So how do you start healing from this? And I know you work with so many people with this kind of issues. So how do you, what can you give us an example, or maybe somebody that you helped, what they went through, without of course telling us the names or whatever,
Yeah.
how you were
Yeah,
able
of
to
course.
heal them?
Yeah. So I've worked with so many people over the years and I've watched just major transformations. I've seen people go from like couldn't get out of bed because they were so triggered by everyone and everything around them. And they were so drained from the empathy overload that they would get, because that's often what a lot of people who had narcissistic parents, their empathy is going out to the narcissistic parent all the time. That energy exchange is happening where they feel completely drained. And so I watched people get out of bed and start businesses that became very successful because they were able to release the anger, the shame, the rage, the guilt, and the grief. There's always a tremendous amount of grief associated with this. And then and when you do that, you're able to get to, okay, well, wait a minute, who am I? What's my purpose? Why am I here? Those big existential questions that really plague somebody who's been through narcissistic abuse, but they don't have any idea how to answer them because they feel so disconnected from their own identities. So that's one thing I've seen. I've seen people have their diagnoses redacted. So for instance, a woman came to me who had severe depression and they redacted her diagnosis after working with me. And that was only I think we only did 8 sessions together. So, and she had been doing work on herself. A lot of people that come to me have been doing a lot of work on themselves for years. And they're just like, I need to get to the next level. I need to go deeper into the subconscious mind and the body and get this stuff out, because they can feel there's a difference between who they think they are and then who they know they are. And there's often this wall between it. And so I help them take that wall down so that they can live the life that they know in their hearts that they want to live. They just don't know how to get from point A to point B. So,
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I know
yeah.
I've worked with you long time ago. It's I don't know how many
Yeah.
years. And we had worked on emotional that way, like going inward to our emotions. I can't exactly remember. What was it that we were working on? Do you remember? It was a workshop I
Yeah.
did with you.
Yeah. So Whole person integration technique is what I would teach in that workshop, and also evolving intuition. So, intuitive development is so important for people who have been through narcissistic abuse because we lose that ability to hear that inner soft voice because those other voices are so loud, the critical ones. So, building self-trust through getting you connected with your intuitive self and then evolving that part of yourself is a big part of the healing process. And then whole person integration technique is the technique that I use to help people to get to that emotional root cause and how the body's holding that emotion. And when I say I'm talking about the negative emotions, which I like to call them teaching emotions, like guilt and shame and pain and sorrow and rage, so that we can release those from our systems. And then what happens when the person sees like, oh, that anger is in my heart, and oh my gosh, I have heart disease, and I see how this makes my chest so tight, and I get this thing where I feel like I have these panic attacks because my chest gets so tight. And so then they see all the holistic connections of, oh, that emotion, and that emotion is believing that I'm unlovable, for instance. And so they see the root belief. They're like, wait a minute, I don't want that in my system anymore. And so when we do the process to release it, then we do a replacement process, which ends up being my prescription for my clients. Because like your podcast, it's all about peace, right? Feeling peace. And how do we get to that place? And that's really what we infuse, because I want people's default to go from getting triggered to anger or sorrow. Mine was sadness. That was my go-to emotion. I would get sad about everything, crying at the drop of a hat about everything. And getting from there to feeling peace, to feeling compassion, to feeling just happy about your life, excited about your day.
That's a beautiful work. That's so many people that are going through and they don't even know what's going on and why they have certain issues. And I guess they should start looking around to see if there are any narcissists around in their midst.
Yeah. That's good advice,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are living with a narcissist, how do you deal with them when you know that this is a narcissist, and trying to understand if I don't know, some examples, if the narcissist is constantly, or your partner is constantly putting you down, for instance, no matter what you do, you're always wrong. How do you deal with that? How do you put a stop to that?
Well, I think ultimately you really do need to seek help with somebody who can help you who's informed in narcissistic abuse recovery. That'll help you so much, because you need to get to a point where you're strong enough to even carry out the tactics that we hear all the time. Like if you watch Dr. Ramani or me or anybody else on YouTube talking about it, one of the first things that will tell you to do is to stop engaging. So you stop getting into that argument. But that's not an easy thing to do when you're feeling so weakened, when you have so little energy available to yourself that you're sick, you feel awful all the time, you're depressed. In many cases, people become suicidal because they're just like, they feel like they're at the end of their ropes with this kind of treatment day in and day out for years. So getting to a place where you get strong enough to be able to stop engaging. And if you can do that on your own, good for you. I hope you can. The consequences usually when you first stop arguing with them are they keep pushing you more and more and more and more to try to get that same response, because they're looking for your energy. They want it. But when you stop doing it, eventually they stop using you as a source of their supply. But if you're a spouse, that's much more complicated than just that one piece of advice. There's a lot more to go on that.
Are there any other pieces of advice you can impart?
Let's see. So don't engage. Focus on yourself. Do things to help you. Do things that you love, that will help you feel more empowered, that help you feel more connected. A lot of times a narcissist will completely isolate you from other people in your life. They do this, they divide people all the time. That's like one of their superpowers, is dividing everybody so that you can't be there, be with people who might help you. And so when you start reaching out, you can start reaching out online to people that can help you in online support groups, and start learning from them, like, hey, what can I do? Start watching videos like on my YouTube channel, and start learning from me things that you can do to help you get through this experience. You have to give up the idea that there's nothing you can do. They want you to be in that space. They want you to feel like there's no place to go, nothing I can do, because then they've got you, they've got control of you, and that's what they want. When you start to take your healing into your own hands and learning things that you can do to help yourself, the game totally changes for you. And, if you have kids, to be able to show them that, you can stand up and take care of yourself, and that you're not going to continue allowing the abuse to go on for you or for your children, is like a huge statement. It's not something you do just like that, but you can start making your way towards doing that, step by step.
So as a spouse, are you saying that it is possible to stay in the marriage and get along with a narcissist, or just leave?
Get along. That's an interesting way.
Get
Some people
along.
do choose. Some people
Yeah.
do choose to stay in the relationship with the narcissistic parent or the narcissistic mate, and they find tactics and ways to be able to deal with them. Basically giving them what they want in essence, but they're doing it from a place of power, not from the place of disempowerment, where they're giving away all their energy to this person. It's a whole different way of doing this, but it takes time and effort and help to be able to get to that place where you can actually do that, and where you can focus on yourself and create your own life even with that person. But for the most part, if you really want to fully recover, I really do recommend, finding a way to get out, which is also not going to be easy. A narcissistic mate will not make divorce an easy segue. It's going to be very difficult. They make everything difficult. They basically shoot themselves in the foot at every turn. They make things so much harder for you, but it makes it harder for them. But they really don't care, because they're so vindictive that it doesn't matter to them. It's just all about wanting to be on top. It's where they always want to be.
So what makes a narcissist? How do you get there?
Oh
How do you
boy, that's a good
become?
question. How do you become? There's multiple ways, but what they're finding mostly is that there's trauma that happens usually in toddlerhood, between the ages of 0 and 7 or so. And a lot of people will say, I feel like I'm dealing with my narcissistic parent who's, a 70-year-old toddler. If you feel that, it's like, oh, well, that might be a clue for you, because you can't say no to them. It's just, and they throw fits, like a toddler does. So there's a lot of similarities there that you'll see. But so trauma can make them that way. Also, having narcissistic parents or grandparents or people around you, you can recycle those narcissistic behaviors as manipulation tactics they use to try to get power and energy. And sometimes you're recycling those things, and you could be highly empathetic and still be doing those same behaviors. The difference between the narcissist and the person who's empathic and is recycling behaviors is the empathic person can change them. The narcissistic person cannot. They can't self-reflect, so they can't see themselves in their reality. And I often will say that I feel like what they did is, whatever the trauma was or series of traumas that they experienced, they cut themselves off from love coming in and love going out, because that's really how they appear to me and seem to me. And then they create this false sense of self to try to make themselves feel better, and to try to make themselves feel more powerful or feel powerful at all when they felt powerless. So there's that piece is a big part of it.
So it's not something that you're inherit, like it's not in your genes. It's
It
trauma.
might well be. Yeah, it's really hard to know exactly because again, you see them coming down through family systems, but trauma is a big piece of that. It's like a protective thing that they try to do.
So it's a learned behavior, or it's trauma,
Or
or it
both,
could be, or both,
or
or it could
genetics.
be
It could be all of
genetic.
those things operating all at once.
So if it is from a childhood trauma, let's say, and if you
Mhm.
go back and you start healing that,
Yeah.
will that change the person, or do you think it's just they're just so hardwired now?
Not if they're if they have the personality disorder. I have not seen any places where it's possible, although I have seen like a number of these people on YouTube that are narcissists that have these big channels and they're talking about, going to therapy and all of that. And they may have changed some of their behaviors, but that basic way that they think is, it does seem to be hardwired. So, some people do seek therapy, but they make the therapy all about them,
Them.
so that's another way. It's not just garden variety selfishness, which we see a lot of in the world. It goes so far beyond selfishness to, I'm the only person who really exists in this world here. I have this false self that I project to everyone else. And in my closest relationships, you get all of the shame, the guilt, the pain, all the stuff that I am not willing to look at. You get it. And so then, and if you're an empath and a sensitive, then you're just sponging in this stuff until you learn how to create boundaries, until you develop your intuition, until you develop your empathic overload. Because empathy and intuition are like this. They're really one thing. And when you learn to hone the intuition, the empathy hones too. So that's another helpful tip for people.
So it's a lot of work for the empaths to unravel, depending on how long you've been with the narcissist. And if you're a child of a narcissist, that's a lot of unraveling that you have to go through, like you did.
Yeah.
And with the
Yeah.
spouse, or mate, depending on how long you stuck it out, and you would have all that time of things to unravel. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's going to unravel a lot faster if you find the right practitioner to help you with it. And if you find the right modalities that really speak to you, and and then you keep focusing on you. And I find that over and over again how hard it is for people to focus on themselves because they're so other oriented, because they were so programmed
Mhm.
to be other oriented. But that's going to help so much, is you focusing on you and focusing on your healing. I often will say, as long as you're in a body, the fun never stops. you know, there's
Yes,
always something to grow through, always something to learn about, and ways to evolve. But the more you do this work on yourself, the quicker you cycle through things, because it's like a muscle. You become adept at your own healing when you step into it and say, you know what, I'm going to do what it takes to heal, and I'm going to keep at it as needed. There'll be times where you have amazing periods of all these great things happening, and then times where you're like, oh boy, I need help again. You're just being asked to go to another level, and that's okay. It's part of life. Series of wake up calls, right?
exactly. I know that with myself, when I started my healing journey, it was certain people. Then I thought, okay, I'm okay now. I need to go a step higher and higher, and it's not stopped. I've been at this journey for a very long time, and I keep evolving. We all do, right?
Mhm.
We all do. The idea, the trick is we need to work on ourselves. We have to, if we want to
Yeah,
bring peace into our lives. And if we bring peace into our lives, we can bring peace to people around us, and then it'll just go from there. So the important thing is we have to work on ourselves.
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. When I worked with you, Meg, you also talked about the trauma that we hold in our bodies, and
Mm.
depending on where the trauma is, or where the, like if you have kidney issues, that tells you something about what you're holding, or if you have pain in your back, that tells you. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of about the different parts? For instance, kidneys. What does that mean? If you have a, is it different if you have a right kidney issue or a left kidney issue?
Yeah, actually, great questions. So I often will say the body's a metaphor for your experience, and the kidneys are in the third center of the human energy system. So that's your solar plexus. That's your center of personal power and self-confidence. That's the one that I go help people with first, because that's the one the narcissistic parent just hooks right into, or any narcissist does, because that's your personal power.
Mm.
They're draining you of it. And anyone who's been through it will be like, oh my gosh, yes, they'll be nodding their head right now. you know so the kidneys, in Chinese medicine, are known as the life force organ. And so think about it, life force is being sucked out of you. So the left side of the body is feminine, the right side is masculine. So if it's your left kidney, it might have more to do, like if you had a narcissistic mother, or a very difficult relationship with your mother, or with women, or with your own femininity. If it's male, it might be the right side. It might be, it was your father. I've seen this so many times, like hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 25 years, where, like a person who has a stroke on the left side, I'm like, oh, so your relationship with your mother was very difficult. How did you know that? you know? Well, it's part intuition and part like your body's telling me that. So,
Mm.
and I think that's a great question, Saju. There's so many, everything's a metaphor for the experience, and the human energy system is, I think, the most important system and the most overlooked, because that's where everything stops and starts. It's the only permanent part of you. It's the thing you come into this world with and you leave this world with. So let's take care of it while we're here, you know.
Well, so your body is telling you what's going on. We
Mhm.
we just look at pain and we take medication, and we try and. But
Yeah.
if we really look at it and say, okay, like for instance, my right arm has been hurting for a while.
Mhm.
It's better now, but I was told it's the male energy, something to do with the male energy that I have to, and I know what it is, and I started working on that. So I'm feeling, you know a lot
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
And so that's what we really need to look at. And I know, is it true that with the kidneys it's also fear, that it's got something to do with fear
Fear
too much?
may be what I find is that, say somebody does have kidney issues and they come to me, is that they could be storing any number of emotions in their kidneys that are connected to that. So fear could definitely be one of them. And that's often, I mean, you hear everybody, like in Course in Miracles, it's love or fear, basically, you
Yes.
know, pick your, yeah.
Yes.
So you know what I'm
Love or
talking
fear.
about.
Yes.
Mhm.
And what about, I just wanted to get a few more, like to give people some examples. What about liver? If you have
The
issues of the liver,
liver,
if you have liver
yeah.
cancer or you have some issues in your liver, what are you holding? What's going on?
So the liver's the seat of anger. And so a lot of people who have issues with anger are pushing them into the liver. It's also the organ of detoxification. And if you just think about like the toxic emotions that have been basically thrown on you and that you're sponging in, especially if you're empathic and sensitive. And so your body, your energy system needs to metabolize that anger. But we don't know how to do that. Nobody even talks about that. What do you mean metabolize my anger? We need to detox from the anger, and we can't just do that by pretending everything's good and we're happy and everything's great. You have to release it. You have to let it go. And so that is also the center of personal power, because that's in the third center of the human energy system. The liver, it sits up pretty high though, so it's not that far from the heart as well, which is your balancing agent. It's the balance between the upper centers of your spiritual life, and the lower centers of your human life. So I think the liver is a very, very important organ in healing in general, that we often get a lot of congestion in that area.
So how do you get rid of, or how do you process anger? Do you shout it out? Do you hit something? Do you just go outside and stand in the sun and put your feet on the ground and just ground yourself? What is it?
Grounding exercises can be very, very helpful for people. The thing that I do with people is I use whole person integration technique to help them release that anger that they may be feeling in their liver. And again, they may be storing shame in the liver. And the shame is one of the densest emotions on the consciousness scale. And so it's very heavy, and people will always describe it that way. And so I can help them to release that shame, and then also the limiting belief, the core belief that the shame itself is holding. So we're looking at the shame as its own entity versus you being wrapped up in your story. So it's not about your story, it's about the story of the shame itself. Well, what is it thinking, feeling, believing? What's its story? What did it go through? Why is it here?
Is the shame same as guilt, or is guilt something else?
So guilt is often how you feel about shame. So shame is something that tells us, and this is what every person who's been a victim of narcissistic abuse, because you feel like you're a bad person. You're the problem. You're to blame for everything that goes wrong. Those tables get turned on you all the time. So shame says, I'm a bad person. And you don't even know how to, you just feel like I'm this terrible person. And you're not in your heart, but you've been led to believe that you are. So you might be holding a tremendous amount of shame. If you were sexually abused as a child, I've worked a lot with sexual abuse and I've been through it myself. Shame is a huge part of what we go through and what we hold on to, not just ours, but also the person who victimized us. We might be holding on to some of their shame, and that's important to release that from the field as well. And then guilt is how bad you feel about it. Guilt and shame, even to a certain degree, all emotions are actually good. It's good that if you can feel shame and if you can feel guilt, yeah, you should feel bad about that thing that you did and go back and apologize or whatever. Yeah, you might want to feel a little bit ashamed about that. It helps us check ourselves. But when it becomes so big and it spins in our system for so long, it can become toxic to the body. And that's what I'm talking about when I say release the shame. It's releasing the toxic shame.
Oh gosh, I see. And what about a lot of people you see have cancer, especially breast cancer? What is that telling us? What are we holding in our
Yeah.
breast?
So again, it's going to be different for different people, but the breasts, if you look at them as the metaphor, they're a place of nurturing, a place of feeding, a place of giving. And sometimes that people who are overgiving, people pleasers, some of the nicest people, may have breast cancer. So, but then there's also all kinds of other things that are influencing it. So things in our environment, our beauty products, our shampoo, the things that we're eating, which is also something I help people with, that whole side of it too, as a holistic chef. At any rate, there are a lot of things that contribute to it. But if in the emotional root cause, I often see with cancer, I see fear and I see long held resentments. So if you're holding resentment, which you cannot not hold, hold resentments towards a parent who treated you so horribly, because you didn't have any place to go with your own expression. No one ever talked through anything with you. You never worked through anything. You never came to compromise. You never did what you would do in a normal, healthy relationship. You have no idea what that is if you've been through this kind of abuse.
Yeah, that's a lot. There's so much of
Yeah.
pain and suffering. So you're talking about environmental toxins,
Yeah.
contribute to all these illnesses. But is it one and the other, or usually it's both together?
It's both and.
So it's not
Yeah,
only
both
that,
and.
there's usually an emotional also.
Yeah, because if you look, we are holistic systems: mental, emotional, physical, and energetic and spiritual.
Mhm.
And if you ignore any part of the holistic system, you're not going to get the entire healing, if that makes sense. So we need to look at all of the parts of the self. And that means too, your food, your environment, and, what you're breathing in. All of those things are really important to look at.
And there's so much of toxicity out there now that
Yeah.
we really, really
Especially
have
in the
to watch.
US.
Yes.
Yeah. The US is particularly
Yes,
toxic.
I went to
Yeah.
Italy and everything was so great. I could eat everything and I didn't put on any weight and I felt
Yeah.
great. It was wonderful. And then I came back and it all started all over again. So,
I hear it
yes.
all the time, and people are perplexed by that. And I'll boil it down to one word, and that word is poison.
Hmm.
It's the poison they use in our farming practices here that they do not allow in the European Union. They
And
want their people to be healthy. They're banned.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So,
Yeah.
so you do have a YouTube channel that where you discuss different aspects of narcissism and how it can be, how you can help that. And you
Yes.
also have a coaching practice. So if anybody feels that they are in this and then they want to, is it only narcissists or do you work with everything? Any
I work
emotions?
with basically will work with everything in emotions, but I do focus on parental narcissistic abuse, adult children of narcissists. I call us ACONs because we've been conned. And my coaching program is called Iconic Me, so that you can become the icon of your own life, which means independent, confident, original, and naturally you. So helping people walk that pathway is a big part of what I do. So yes, so I help them with illness and holistic wellness, but also that emotional root cause of pain in the body, of persistent symptoms that you're so used to that you're like, oh, I didn't even think about my elbow that hurts a lot. Is could be, there's an emotional root cause that never occurred to me, that kind of thing. So,
Wow.
and then I also have an online course called Healing the 5 Primary Wounds of Parental Narcissistic Abuse. That's, a do-it-yourself kind of course that has people are loving it, really understanding like, oh, those are the wounds. And then I do energy exercises in there for them. So,
How long has it been since you've been working with narcissism?
honestly, I've been working throughout my career with it. And that's been the last 20 years, but most intensely the last 4 or 5 years because I wasn't public about it because of my own situation with my own family. But yes, so I've been intensively working with it more the last 4 years or so.
Awesome. Okay. So, I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, if we can understand ourselves, we can understand our bodies and find, figure out these are the emotions. We can really start healing ourselves. And that's what, again, peace will bring peace into our bodies
Yes.
and we'll be more healthy and take care of course, we have to take care of environment and food and everything else, but
Yeah.
one step at a time, right?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, this is a question I ask everyone. What
Mhm.
does a peaceful world look like to you?
A peaceful world comes from, and what it looks like is it comes from everyone doing your own healing, taking your healing into your own hands, focusing on you, focusing on your side of the street and cleaning that up, focusing on your emotional well being and learning how to regulate all of that. Because the more healed you are, the more peaceful you are, and the more peaceful the world becomes. And I've said before, like, peace begins with every individual who's willing to make a difference in your own life and in your own heart. And that to me is a peaceful world. It's peaceful people, you know.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you there. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. And before we end this podcast, is there anything else you would maybe like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think, and I often end my talks this way, is that taking your healing into your own hands, learning to listen to your own inner voice, and finding the help that you need to get to the next level of your own healing is one of the most powerful and empowering things you can do for yourself. And when you do that, everything changes. You make that one decision, I'm going to take care of this next level, and everything changes. All the people come to you, all the resources you need, all the money comes to you to do it. You just have to get to that place of like, okay, I'm ready. I'm doing it. I'm done with that old level. I'm ready for the next one.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That really helps me a lot too. Thank you for saying
Oh,
that.
good.
So again, Dr. Meg, thank you very much for being here and sharing your wonderful knowledge with all of us. And I'm sure if all of you would like to get in touch with Dr. Meg, there will be all the links in the information section.
My website at meghaworth.com. It's HAWORTH. No Y.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure you will have a lot of people getting in touch with you. And I thank you again very much for being here.
Thank you, Saju. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Quest for Peace, a podcast about navigating outer chaos with inner harmony. Whether you're seeking solace in the midst of life's challenges or simply curious about the profound connection between inner and outer peace, the Quest for Peace podcast is your guide on this transformative expedition.